Some people don't talk about what they're going through, not because nothing is happening, but because too much is. They listen, they nod, they ask how others are doing. And when it's their turn, they say, "I'm fine," and move on. Not dramatically, not bitterly, just quietly. If you've ever noticed that pattern in yourself, this isn't about weakness. It's about something far more complex. There's a certain kind of person who carries things inward. They don't announce pain. They don't post it. They don't ask for advice easily. From the outside, they seem composed, maybe even emotionally strong. But inside, there's a constant private processing of thoughts, memories, and unspoken feelings. They've learned how to sit with discomfort without letting it leak out. This behavior rarely appears out of nowhere. Most people who don't share their problems weren't always silent. At some point, they tried. They opened up. They explained themselves. They trusted. And something subtle happened, or something deeply painful. They were misunderstood, interrupted, minimized, given solutions when they needed presence. Or worse, they were made to feel like their honesty was a burden. Psychologically, this creates a shift. The mind begins to associate vulnerability with disappointment. Not consciously at first, quietly, slowly. The nervous system remembers. It learns that staying contained feels safer than being exposed. So the person adapts. Not by shutting down completely, but by becoming selective to the point of silence. There's also another layer that often goes unnoticed. Many people who don't share their problems are highly perceptive. They read emotional cues well. They sense when someone is distracted, when empathy is forced, when listening is shallow. So instead of speaking and feeling unseen, they choose to remain quiet and preserve their inner dignity. This doesn't mean they don't need support. It means they've learned to survive without expecting it. They've become emotionally self-reliant, sometimes too early in life, sometimes before they were ready. Emotionally, this creates a strange experience. On one hand, there's pride in handling things alone, a sense of control, stability, self-respect. On the other hand, there's loneliness. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that shows up when something heavy happens, and there's no one you instinctively reach for. They often feel deeply, but privately. They process emotions internally, replaying conversations that never happened, imagining explanations they'll never give, writing mental letters they'll never send. There's a lot of emotional labor happening beneath the surface that no one sees. Disappointment plays a big role here. Not dramatic disappointment, but accumulated disappointment. Small moments where opening up didn't lead to connection. Moments where vulnerability was met with logic instead of empathy, or silence instead of care. Over time, the heart learns to retreat without making a scene. Self-protection becomes second nature. Not in a defensive way, but in a quiet boundary-setting way. They stop explaining themselves. They stop correcting misunderstandings. They stop seeking validation for feelings they've already analyzed 100 times. But this doesn't mean there's no inner conflict. In fact, the conflict is constant. There's a part of them that wants to be understood without having to translate themselves, and another part that believes that expectation is unrealistic. So they compromise by saying nothing. They may tell themselves they're better off this way, and in some ways they are. They've developed emotional intelligence, patience, resilience. They know how to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. They don't panic easily. They don't collapse at the first sign of stress. But there's also a cost. Carrying everything alone can slowly harden the emotional edges. It can make connection feel distant, even when it's available. It can make asking for help feel unnatural, almost embarrassing, as if needing someone means you failed some internal standard of strength. What's interesting is that many of these people are deeply compassionate toward others. They listen carefully, they show up, they hold space. They become the person others feel safe with. Yet when it's their turn, they step back.
They don't want to be that person. They don't want to take up emotional space. There's often an unspoken belief underneath all of this. If I can handle it myself, I should. Not because they don't trust others, but because trusting themselves feels more predictable. With time, awareness begins to shift things. Not dramatically, not overnight, but slowly.
They start to realize that silence isn't always strength, and sharing isn't always weakness. That emotional maturity doesn't mean carrying everything alone. It means knowing when connection is part of healing. This doesn't mean suddenly oversharing or forcing vulnerability. It means recognizing that being selective doesn't have to mean being isolated. That letting one safe person see the real weight you carry doesn't erase your independence. It deepens your humanity. Growth here looks quiet.
It looks like choosing one honest sentence instead of a full explanation. It looks like saying, "I've been dealing with something," instead of, "I'm fine." It looks like allowing yourself to be supported without needing to justify it. People who don't share their problems aren't broken. They're often deeply self-aware, emotionally layered, and internally strong. But even strength needs rest. Even self-reliance needs relief. At some point, silence stops being protection and starts becoming distance. And recognizing that moment, that's not weakness. That's emotional intelligence evolving. Not everyone needs to hear your story, but someone should. And maybe, slowly, you'll allow that possibility back in. Not because you can't handle things alone, but because you don't always have to.